According to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, from 2008 to 2009, our budget deficit more than tripled from $455 billion to $1.42 trillion. How big of a problem is our exponentially increasing budget deficit, and how would you directly try to affect it?
It's a really big problem. We all got used to saying the Pledge of Allegiance as school children, and it has that four-syllable word, indivisible. We often tend to separate it from under God. But you can bet, as we all have seen through our lifetimes, that this country is very divisible. It is only under God that we have a chance to maintain our union. It's easy to get despairing about something like the debt. But a couple of young men from this hometown gave their lives last month for the cause of us, of America, and of humanity. Because that is what we are fighting for, is for freedom. And it is God's blessing to us, and it is our duty to the rest of humanity. It is very scary how much things are getting out of control. But at the same time, in a way, it's kind of like a question about abortion. Not only how many jobs and businesses are being exported overseas, but how many businesses, how many jobs are not even being born in this country because of government oppression, because of the overregulation. As we can decrease these monstrosities, that is what will free this country to boom in ways which even something so far into the trillions that it's almost unimaginable at this point, that even something like that can and will be conquered. This country has had too much paid for it for her to ever be not worth fighting for.
I know that this deficit can be attacked directly. I was part of that Contract with America spirit among congressmen that came forth with a balanced budget amendment and put strict caps. And if we will take those departments I mentioned, push them back into the states, hey, there's $1 trillion over 10 years right there. I do know this. I saw it close and personal. Half of that money's being thrown down the rat hole, thrown into the toilet. Don't tell me we can't bring a balanced budget back to America. We can and we will, with conservative, constitutionally based appropriations under Article 1, Section 8.
I believe that a balanced budget amendment is going to be the wrong approach to this. I've been around long enough to know that we've had 2 tries at it, and all these amendments that are being proposed out there are going to spark a constitutional convention. They have in the past. We've got another one in the works right now. We have to be very careful about that. Instead, what we need to do is we need to look at each bill, and we need to attach to it a balanced budget provision. And another thing that we can do is fulfill Reagan's dream of dismantling the Department of Education, dismantle the Department of Energy and the EPA. If we cut back on those agencies that do not have constitutional authority to be there in the first place, we will cut back on 25% of our budget. And we also have to follow the money. We've been using Keynesian economics for far too long. Tax, spend, debt, and regulate. We've got to stop.
I agree with what Cheryl just has to say. She's right. Another thing that needs to be done away with is the Federal Reserve System, because that's costing us a lot of money.
If you go to the U.S. debt clock that you might have seen St. Beck refer to on his TV show, you realize that the national debt isn't 14 trillion, but 55 trillion. And in order to get out of that, we're going to have to stop considering the role of the government to enforce entitlement programs and get back to individuals, families, communities, churches, and the states taking care of their own.
The reason deficit spending is such a problem is because it's the midwife of big government expansion. It enables politicians to accomplish the dual possible. more government services without any increase in tax to the present generation. But all that does is it transfers the debt to a future generation. It's a different kind of debt. You know, the kind of debt that we as individuals take on doesn't pass to future generations when we die. Government debt does. That's why we need a balanced budget amendment right now.
The last 9 years has produced $6 trillion worth of debt. In the next 10 years, we will be paying anywhere from $5 to $7 trillion in interest alone in the next 10 years. This is an extremely important problem that we have to solve. The way to do it is we've got to get Americans back to work. We've got to cut our spending on programs that do not help people. Then we have to reform Social Security. We have to reform Medicare. I know, from a Democrat even.
To close the deficit gap, you have to increase revenues and cut spending, and you increase revenues by getting the economy back on track. Ronald Reagan inherited a recession almost as bad as this one. The unemployment rate was higher than it is today, and he cut taxes, stimulated the economy. The revenue went up dramatically as a result of the cut in capital gains tax rates, and that, along with controlling entitlement spending, is the way to close the gap, bring the deficit down, and begin to hack away at the national debt. I've got programs to deal with all of those problems.
The Founding Fathers said much about debt. One quote will have to do. This is Thomas Jefferson. I place economy among the first and foremost of Republican virtues, and public debt as the greatest of the dangers to be feared. This nation must be trembling in its boots at this time. The only way we will resolve this debt issue is to return to the Constitution, limit our spending to the powers granted within the national government, and if we do that, the revenue stream will quickly catch up with the expense stream and surpass it.
My son's a senior at Timpview High School, and he was assigned to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he said, Dad, you've got to use this quote in your campaign. And it said, the problem in Washington, D.C. is that we have a highly educated group of people that have never managed cash flow, and they don't understand the relationship between revenues and expenses. That is why we are $14 trillion in debt. They just do not get it. I run a business, 60 employees. If I did not cut spending dramatically, when the revenues go down, we would be out of business. It would be foreclosed on our property, and it would be the end. The country doesn't get it. The leaders don't get it. They are spending us into bankruptcy, and we have to make big changes. We have to ask Americans to sacrifice entitlements, because if we do not reform entitlements, there is no way out of this mess.
It is big trouble. But to conclude what I said earlier, anyone who fights for freedom does not die in vain. If we choose to lose by leaving Afghanistan, if we don't do what needs to be done in this country to take care of this burgeoning debt, then we won't be the only losers. There will be a cascade of disaster throughout the rest of the world who have engaged in their own socialism or other tyrannies based on the reliance that, well, it's okay, the United States will dampen this out. We cannot fall and expect the rest of humanity to not fall even harder. Again, my great devotion to liberty is because my son is a United States Marine. But all of us have that stake in what needs to endure. Thank you.